Rising out of the desert like an electronic jewel is Las Vegas and its vibrant, energetic architecture. In a city known for dazzling lights and extravagant buildings, it's no wonder that it's home to this, the Las Vegas Sphere. When the music venue opened in 2023, it captured the attention of the world with its crystal clear LED images that enveloped the entire structure, perfectly blurring the lines between the digital and the physical worlds. The images that appear on the Sphere have turned the building into a dynamic structure that engages the public in a totally new way. It's the latest example of a relatively new phenomenon in architecture known as media architecture, where technology, media, and architecture combine to create a complete visual experience. Though a relatively new term, we can trace its history back years, and its potential for redefining the built environment is profound. But as we stand at the threshold of this new architectural frontier, it's important to question what it will do to the future of our cities. Will this fusion with technology bring about a new vitality to our cities, or will these new bright digital canvases turn cities into dystopic places, like Los Angeles and Blade Runner, with advertisements dominating every inch of our skylines? Let's find out. Hey everyone, my name's Steve, and I love all things architecture. But with so much jargon and abstract concepts, it's sometimes hard to know just what it all means. So join me as we demystify the world of architecture. This is Architecture 101. When you think about media architecture, you probably think about things like urban screens or media facades, and places like Times Square or the Vegas Strip. And you'd be right, but media architecture encapsulates so much more. Everything from projections to public art pieces can be defined as examples of media architecture. At its core, media architecture is about communicating through light. Now, the architect Robert Venturi wrote a book in the 1990s called Iconography and Electronics Upon a Generic Architecture, which, once you get past the long title, is one of the first books that discuss this emerging style. He never referred to it as media architecture, though, but by the term architecture as communication. Nevertheless, he saw media in architecture as a modern version of traditional iconography, things like hieroglyphics etched into the walls of ancient Egyptian buildings or mosaics that appear in early Byzantine architecture. Both examples use architecture as a place to communicate with people. However, those early examples don't involve light. But that would change in medieval Europe, when Gothic cathedrals used natural light to illuminate beautiful stained glass windows, where Bible stories were depicted so that the mostly illiterate church-going public in medieval Europe could learn the teachings of the church. Now let's fast forward a little bit to the age of electricity. Once electricity became prevalent, it was only a matter of time that it would be used for communicative purposes. The first introduction of electric signage was in 1881 during the Paris International Exposition. There, Thomas Edison's company spelled out Edison in bright incandescent bulbs. The display of the electric sign was a captivating novelty at the time, but within 10 years, electric signage would find its way to cities around the world. Nowhere was this more prevalent than in New York City. It was there that early electric signs began to appear throughout the city. Many of them were simply billboards illuminated in a ring of lights. The first electric sign to appear in the city is widely considered an advertisement created by the Long Island Railroad to draw urbanites to the beach. It was placed on the side of a building in Worth Square. In the 1900s, theater marquees throughout the city's booming theater district got in on the action. It became a competition for who had the brighter lights. One of the brightest spots was Times Square. While many in the city saw these lights as exciting elements that brought vitality to the street, some were less enthusiastic. The writer William Dean Howells commented in 1896 that, quote, "It seemed as if the signs might eventually hide the city." But the signs continued to spring up, getting brighter and bigger. And in 1928, a new kind of sign was installed. This one was anything but static. It changed every day, with the possibility of changing every hour. On Election Day 1928, the Motograph News Bulletin, known to locals as the Zipper, displayed the top headlines of the day with the help of 14,800 bulbs, rotating along the base of the then-named Times Tower like a mechanical frieze. Metal plates with indentations in the shape of letters, ran on a conveyor belt past contacts that would cause the appropriate bulb to illuminate and run around the facade. Why it's significant was in its ability to be easily changed. It was dynamic both in its movement across the facade and in its relevant information. The zipper would be where many in the city would learn about major news, and it would run well into the 1990s. Up to this point, media in architecture was mostly relegated to advertisements or as a novelty. But things would change in the post-war era as architecture marched towards postmodernism. For that, we travel back to Las Vegas. The Vegas of the 1950s was a bit different than it is today. It was smaller, but still energetic. It was an architectural midway dripping in lights, with every casino trying its best to attract people traveling down the highway in their cars. The sign designers, many of whom were commercial artists from Los Angeles, used mostly neon because of its ability to easily bend to their whims, making it perfect to create any image imaginable, from cowboys to planets. One of the most impressive examples of these early casinos was the original Stardust from 1958. The building itself was a plain tilt-up concrete building, but with the help of sign designer Kermit Wayne, its presence was heightened by creating a cosmic spectacle of lights and neon. The hotel's name sat on either side of the facade with a plastic earth in the center. This early version of a media facade was so large that one of the S's on the facade was made up of 975 bulbs. The theme was carried over to the pylon sign along the strip, with its equally impressive cosmic display, making it one of Vegas's most recognizable landmarks of the era. And it wasn't just the Stardust that showcased this electric vitality. Each casino worked to outdo the last guy. Over the years, the signs and hotels got bigger and brighter. While most discounted Vegas and its early media architecture, the architects Denise Scott Brown and Robert Venturi saw its vitality. They researched the architecture of the city in the early 1970s and suggested in their book, Learning from Las Vegas, that the neon signs along the strip were often more important architecturally than the buildings themselves. Their ideas would shine a light on media and how it could seamlessly be incorporated into a building, laying the groundwork for what we'd see in the future. Along with new ideas came new technologies. Though digital screens had existed since 1946, with the first one being installed in Times Square, the technology greatly improved in the 1980s and 1990s. The 1990s also saw a transformation of Times Square, with a restoration of classic theaters and a replacement of old signage with newer ones. Billboards were still the main form of media displayed back then, but new digital signs were starting to emerge. Gwathmey Siegel and Associates designed the Morgan Stanley building in 1990, which featured digital zippers that displayed a rotation of stocks and news headlines along the base of the building. It was among the first to embrace the digital age. The most ambitious of this era was in a renovation of an old theater up the street from the Morgan Stanley building. It began when Disney purchased the ABC network and wanted to revitalize the network's Good Morning America program with a new studio.
Because we built places, we came back and said, you know what you guys need? You need something on the street like the Today Show.
This is Eddie Sotto, an experiential designer and former Disney Imagineer. In 1997, he was tasked with creating a concept for this new studio that would also include an ABC-themed cafe. The original location was to be placed in Columbus Circle.
They go, well, you know, Columbus Circle, this is too big for that. Too big for that. We're going to do Times Square.
The location for this new studio was 1500 Broadway. Built in 1972, it's your standard late modernist skyscraper, boxy and static. The new studio would occupy the podium level in what was once the National Theater. Eddie worked with collab architects to help transform the space into something that would wow people walking through Times Square.
And so they're like, well, what is this going to look like? And part of the edict of Times Square is you can't go in unless you have a sign. So I can't remember the name of this artist, but I went to New York, and I was meeting with people there with ABC, and I went to MoMA or something, and there was an artist who had an installation of just red news zippers, they're called, where the words go by. Like we used to always be there. To me, that was the iconic language of Times Square, is these electric light bulbs, transmitting these words. Of course, we have the internet now. I was looking at that, and she had them, on this wall and stuff. And I was looking at that, and I thought, how do you stand out against all of these signs in Times Square? Why don't we go the opposite direction? I thought, why don't we take the news zippers and twist them and bend them as liquid? We're going to make them all liquid and make them twist and have them bent. We had tried them square and different sides, twist them and bend them and make them elegant and make them in motion. Like news is active, like news is alive.
And it was during this conceptual stage the team coined a new term to define such an ambitious project.
I went to Michael Eisner. I said, Michael, this is media as architecture. What if the internet could look out into Times Square and people on Times Square could see into the internet, and the building is just a window into those two worlds?
As the concept of media as architecture continued to mature, the team realized that it needed to create new software to program the LED zippers.
I wanted the whole thing liquid LED, but we did the zippers, and there were two programs. One, all the text would move at the same speed on all the zippers, because all the zippers were different length. If you can imagine that, it's undulating. I said, well, wait a minute. If you vary the speed of the words, let's try that. So the words would travel at different speeds across it, and it becomes hypnotic. So I would go into Times Square when we were testing it and watch people on the street looking at it. And people would stay there for like 5 minutes reading it, just following it like a tennis match, reading it. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. Let's go with software B, the hypnotic version.
The building was completed in 1999, and from its opening became a landmark in Times Square. Moreover, it showed that new media didn't have to be relegated to a frame on the side of a building, but it could engage the city, becoming a dynamic and active participant. As the new millennium arrived, a museum expansion would help further the advancement of media architecture with a different approach. This is the Kunsthaus that by day looks like a spaceship, but by night is illuminated with images created by visual artists. It was the winning proposal by architects Peter Cook from Archigram fame and Colin Fjerner in 1999. Originally, they wanted a museum that was nearly transparent, with lights embedded in the glass to change the color of the building. But technological and economic limitations halted the ambitious ideas, causing the architects to return to the drawing board. The updated concept was an ingenious one. It was called the Bix facade, and was designed with the help of the company Realities United. Beneath the building's blob-like glass facade are rings of fluorescent lighting, just like the ones found in your standard office building. The lighting allowed for enough resolution to program abstract imagery into the facade. It's a feature that's subtle yet mesmerizing. In regard to media architecture, the museum proved that the media created for a building didn't necessarily have to be representational, but could be just as effective in its abstraction as well. It was around this time that the term media architecture was coined. Books like Scott McQuire's The Media City recognized this new phenomenon, highlighting its many examples. But even with this early recognition, media architecture was not widely regarded as anything more than a novelty. The early 2010s brought about the advancement in projection mapping. With a series of projectors, a building's facade could transform right before the public. Disney Imagineering was among the early innovators in this realm, projecting guests' photos onto the facade of Walt Disney World's Cinderella Castle each night. Digital artists often create detailed models of the facade and overlay the imagery onto it to ensure that the images complement the details of the facade. An incredible display of projection mapping is over at Chicago's Merchandise Mart. In 2018, the Art Deco building's massive 2.5-acre facade was first transformed into a canvas for digital artists. It's a program called Art on the Mart, and it offers artists the chance to display their art at an impressive scale. Many of these projections play with the architecture of the building, enlivening it with bright colors and movement. The results have been a great dialogue between the building and the art, and offers a great public amenity that people can enjoy nightly. In that same vein, cities like Sydney have begun offering their own art installations. Starting in 2009, the city has hosted Vivid Sydney, an art festival where many of the city's buildings are reclad to present digital wonderlands. In 2016, in Basel, Switzerland, the expansion of the Kunstmuseum featured an innovative piece by the company iArt, who worked to create a modern interpretation of a traditional frieze, which often incorporates words or iconography to a building's facade. Grooves were placed between each layer of brick, from which LEDs were installed between the grooves. By turning the lights on and off, they cast a shadow on the brick facade, creating an interesting piece of art that doesn't dominate the surrounding area, but still draws attention to the building. With the rise of social media, a new dimension of media architecture is emerging, where the public is invited to interact with the built environment in new ways. In 2016, the Public Visualization Studio adapted a building's facade in Toronto to turn red every time someone retweeted the hashtag homelessness. The installation did two things: drawing attention to a social issue, at the same time creating an engagement with the public where their actions affected the look of the building. By far the one place that has embraced media architecture the most is Asia. There you'll find buildings like the COEX Artium in Seoul, which features a massive anamorphic screen displaying advertisements and incredibly realistic digital art, like this one created by the digital media company District. But one of the most ambitious and impressive examples is this one found in Shenzhen, China. For its 40th anniversary in 2018, the city coordinated with 43 skyscrapers around the city center to create a synchronized light show. The process to do this isn't as easy as stringing up some lights. It took careful planning to install the 1.18 million LEDs in such a way as to make sure that the images appear readable. The result is a nightly show that physically unites the city in a kaleidoscopic mosaic and offers a glimpse into what the cities of tomorrow might look like. Now that we've looked at some of the prime examples of media architecture, we have to address some concerns that people have towards this new kind of building.
Right now, what's going on is media is more or less assaulting you.
In a world dominated by screens and media, do we really want more in our built environment? And what about light pollution? This was a concern for residents in a neighborhood of London when it was announced that the sister to the Vegas Sphere would be built there. The opposition was so great that the parent company of the Sphere canceled the project in early 2024. Beyond light pollution, though, there's environmental concerns. For instance, the energy needed to power the Las Vegas Sphere is roughly 28 megawatts, the equivalent of 21,000 homes. Though the Sphere argues that 70% of that comes from renewable sources, mainly solar. And while that may be the number today, screens are getting more efficient, so it's possible that the energy needed to power them will diminish over time. And then there's the question of what's displayed on them. While cities have programs that use media architecture for artistic purposes, it's still highly commercial. That probably won't change as urban screens bring in money. One Times Square, for instance, home of the old Zipper, makes about $23 million per year with its urban screen. And then there's a concern that these screens will replace traditional architecture. Why design incredible details on a well-proportioned facade that doesn't necessarily bring in money when you can simply put up a shiny new screen that can be easily monetized? Many of the billboards on Times Square cover up well-designed Beaux-Arts buildings, for instance. And what happens if there's nothing to display? Will our cities become filled with architectural voids? While each one of these is a genuine question, if there's one thing we've seen through this overview, it's that there are plenty of creative people working to bring media into architecture in a thoughtful and creative way. It's simply a new tool to engage the public and make a building more interesting. For the first time in our history, our buildings are not static objects, frozen in time, but are able to reflect the current moment. And more importantly, everyone has the opportunity to influence our built environment. I can't help but think about what Marshall McLuhan said about media being the message, meaning the form in which we view the information can be more influential than the information itself. That means that it's possible that just the kinetic energy from the lights and signage alone, forget what they may say, makes the city feel livelier and more exciting. He also argued that such advancements would create a more unified people.
I think that media as architecture is like, how do you blur the lines? How does the building sense you're having a bad day and then alter it?
With media architecture still a relatively new typology, we have a choice. A choice to make sure that our cities don't become like Blade Runner, but instead become unifying places, where the joys of life and art are vividly displayed. and that tomorrow's cities will become more engaging places for everyone. Thanks for watching. I'd like to give a big thanks to Eddie Sotto for sitting down with me and talking about his career. You can check out our entire interview here on the channel. Also, be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time with another edition of All Things Architecture, where every building has a story.